Then. Now, let's discuss all of this with Nick Freeman, motoring lawyer known as Mr. Loophole, very famous for that moniker. Nick, listen, thank you so much for joining us on the Wake Up Call this morning. Let's start with ULEZ. As you're well aware, it's caused a lot of controversy. Is it the right thing or not?
Yes, good morning, Anna. Yes,
Morning.
of course it's the right thing. I think there's a general consensus by everyone it's the right thing. And I think the timing, to be honest, is just slightly premature. Everyone's suffering from cost of living crisis, everything that's happened recently. And I think everyone needs to get together and talk sensibly, because the people who are most affected are the people who are struggling financially. And we're talking really about very old vehicles. Probably, most of the vehicles are sort of 17 years old. And then you've got the diesel vehicles as well. And so whilst I think it's a good idea and it will happen, I think it should be delayed. I think the 29th of August is about 6 months' time. It's just premature. People need to be given more time to get their lives, their financial lives sorted out, their work lives sorted out. And it will punish those who are financially stressed the most, and that's not the intention, not the purpose. So, yes, the spirit of it is good, and I think everybody supports it, but the timing is wrong, and it just would be sensible. I mean, in Greater Manchester, for example, it's been delayed. It was going to be brought in. It's been delayed. I'm not sure how long it's been delayed. I didn't even know if there's a time reference on it, but you see signs everywhere saying under review. So, in my view, Andy Burnham's taking a sensible approach. And that approach should be adopted across the country, and obviously in your area as well, in Greater London and Kent.
What about the idea of expanding the scrappage scheme as well to help people? Because here in Kent, we don't benefit for that, but there will be lots of people who need to drive over the border, Yeah,
well, the problem with the scrappage scheme is it's largely not supported by the government. So it's supported, it's financed by the councils themselves. And I think in London, it's that there's a fund of about £110 million available, and so it will fall on the cash-strapped councils to fund it. So yes, people do need support. These vehicles that we're talking about, I think they constitute probably less than 10% of all vehicles on the road, but they are by and large heavy polluting vehicles. They're vehicles that are expensive to run. They're vehicles that are probably being neglected in terms of service, because they're being used by people who can't afford to trade up. But actually, you can trade up now relatively cheaply. But of course, it's easy to say that. But if you're not earning money, you're struggling financially, then of course that doesn't work, and you don't want to expend any more money. So they do need support. But where that support comes from, does it come from government? I don't know. I'm not a politician, but they certainly do need some support to make it financially viable. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And what will happen is the tradespeople who use these old vehicles are going to be pushed onto the state because they're not going to be able to earn a living.
Exactly. And does it actually work? Because I have had some people questioning the science on this show, and other people saying, no, absolutely, it does bring particulates down. What have we seen from existing schemes? Does it make air cleaner?
I'm not a scientist, Anna, but I would suspect that it definitely works in the cities and city conurbations where there's heavy traffic flow, a lot of congestion. I would say it's an excellent idea. Outside those areas, in my view, it loses the benefits massively. I'm not sure what the statistics show, but when you have a heavy conurbation, clearly you want clean vehicles, and you want to reduce the density of the particulates. But outside those areas, I just can't see the benefits. Certainly, when I travel around the country, as I do on a daily basis, in the areas outside city, there's a huge difference. If, for example, I cycled in London with a cycling vigilante, and I was overwhelmed by the smell, which is something I'd never even thought of. It's something you don't pick up in a car. You literally want to choke. It's not as bad in other cities, but it's bad. When you cycle outside those cities, you feel you're breathing in fresh air. So I would say anecdotally, it's not nearly as bad, and I'm not sure how necessary it is, whether it's cash raising or whether we're just working towards that green agenda 100%. I don't know.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, and anecdotally as well, as someone who used to cycle in London and now cycles in Kent, the difference is tangible. And Nick, what about the figures that Alex uncovered? You heard him talking about overseas vehicles not paying 100,000 fines issued in a year, only 9% paid. Why can't we enforce these?
Well, because our system is defective, it's a chaotic system that simply doesn't work. You need to charge it at source or at a point of entry when they come into the country or at the point of exit. So there needs to be a system which cannot be too difficult to install, so that if people go in emission zones from overseas, their vehicle is registered, and when they leave, either by train or by boat, it's picked up at that point, and there's an additional charge. And that would seem to be quite simple, wouldn't it?
You'd have thought so.
The cost, 8-9%, as you rightly said, is being paid at the moment. That the cost that if they are actively following it up, I know they've contracted it out to this European parking company, I think. The cost is enormous to chase relatively small amounts, and I'm not sure it clearly isn't working. Well, whether it's cost effective or not, it's not working. And we've talked about this with the dark charge, haven't we?
Yes.
And it's the same problem. People come through, they leave the country, and they don't pay, and you are never really going to recover that money. So there is an argument for saying just write it off because it's a relatively small amount, or you say, look, if you're going to come into this country, we're going to charge you an extra thing for bringing a foreign vehicle into the country. And I don't see that that's unreasonable, whether you go through any charges or not, just a general charge for driving in our country, because it costs money and there are lots of foreign vehicles on our roads. Or you have a system that's directed; it targets those vehicles that are actually in the system, whether it's through a charge or ULEZ, and just deal with it, as I say, as they leave the country.
Interesting point, and we shall continue to discuss this morning. Nick, thank you so much for kicking off the conversation. Always good to talk to you, and have a good weekend. Motoring commentator and lawyer then Nick Freeman on plans to expand the ULEZ scheme in August. I wonder what you make of his idea of charging cars for entry. Could be quite simple, might be a good money maker. Meanwhile, Transport for London were not able to join us this morning, but they sent us this statement, which we've put into words for you.
We continue to ensure high levels of compliance with the ULEZ standards by ensuring the scheme is properly enforced. Currently, 94% of vehicles driving in the zone meet the standards. The recovery of payments for ULEZ penalty charge notices for foreign vehicles that don't comply with the emission standards takes longer than for those registered in the UK. The time taken for the penalty charge to reach the customer in a different country requires additional processing steps that will be unique to the relevant country. Our contractor EPC will identify the relevant country and apply to obtain details from the National Licensing Agency. That notice is then sent out to the country. It's a longer process than used for UK vehicles, where that data can be obtained from the DVLA.
And we shall continue to discuss throughout the course